While the world moved forward into a new era, one man stayed behind, frozen in the past. He missed the moon landing that unified humanity. He missed the Beatles revolutionizing music. He missed 30 years of peace, progress, and change, because in his mind, in his reality, it was still 1945. The war had never ended, and he was still a soldier, following orders that the world had long forgotten.
In December 1944, a young Japanese intelligence officer named Hiroo Onoda received orders that would define the rest of his life. He was 22 years old, trained in guerrilla warfare, and fiercely loyal to the emperor. His mission was clear: travel to Lubang Island in the Philippines, conduct reconnaissance, and sabotage enemy operations. But there was one final command from his superior officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, that Onoda would take more seriously than anyone could have imagined. "No matter what happens," Taniguchi told him, "you are absolutely forbidden to die by your own hand. It may take 3 years, it may take 5, but whatever happens will come back for you. Until then, so long as you have one soldier, you are to continue to lead him. You may have to live on coconuts. If that's the case, live on coconuts. Under no circumstances are you to give up your life voluntarily." Onoda arrived on Lubang Island in late 1944 on Lubang Island. The island was small, roughly 60 square miles of dense jungle, rocky terrain, and scattered villages. By the time he landed, the war was already turning against Japan. American forces were closing in. Onoda and a small group of soldiers were tasked with delaying the enemy for as long as possible. Within months, the situation collapsed. Allied forces overwhelmed the Japanese garrison. Most soldiers were killed or captured. Some surrendered. But Onoda, along with 3 other men, Private Yuichi Akatsu, Corporal Shoichi Shimada, and Private First Class Kinchichi Kozuka, refused to give up. They retreated deep into the jungle and waited for orders that would never come. But something happened that Onoda never expected. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. World War II was over. Cities began to rebuild. Soldiers returned home. Families reunited. But on Lubang Island, 4 men had no idea. They lived in caves and crude shelters built from bamboo and palm leaves. They survived on stolen rice, bananas, coconuts, and whatever they could hunt. They maintained their weapons meticulously, rationing ammunition and keeping their rifles clean despite the humidity. Every day, they conducted patrols, set traps, and watched for enemy movements. To them, the war was still raging. In October 1945, just months after the war ended, the Philippine and American forces began dropping leaflets over the jungle. The messages were printed in Japanese. "The war is over. Japan has surrendered. Come out and return home safely." Onoda and his men found the leaflets. They read them carefully. Then they burned them. "This is enemy propaganda," Onoda said. "They're trying to trick us into surrendering." The logic made sense to him. Why would the Americans tell the truth? Why would they make it easy? This had to be a trap. And so they stayed hidden. By 1949, the strain was showing. Private Akatsu, the youngest of the group, couldn't take it anymore. 4 years of hiding, hunger, isolation, and constant fear had broken him. One night, he slipped away from the group and turned himself in to Filipino authorities. When Onoda and the others learned of Akatsu's surrender, they didn't see it as proof that the war was over. They saw it as betrayal. Akatsu had been weak. He had fallen for enemy deception. The remaining 3 soldiers hardened their resolve. They would not make the same mistake. But the world was changing around them in ways they couldn't imagine. While Onoda patrolled the jungle with his rifle, the world moved on. In 1950, the Korean War began. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. In 1963, President Kennedy was assassinated. In 1969, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. The Beatles released albums. Television became commonplace. Japan transformed into an economic powerhouse. But Onoda knew none of this.
his reality remained frozen. He counted days by carving notches into trees. He celebrated the emperor's birthday alone. He maintained military discipline because it was all he had left. By the 1950s, the Japanese government became aware that soldiers might still be hiding in the Philippines. They organized search parties. Families sent letters. Photographs of relatives were dropped from planes. Loudspeakers broadcast messages in Japanese. "Onoda-san, the war is over. Your family is waiting. Please come home." But Onoda had been trained to exactly this kind of psychological warfare. He believed the voices were recordings. The letters were forgeries. The photographs were faked. He had his orders, and his orders were to wait for his commanding officer to relieve him of duty. No one else had that authority. In 1954, tragedy struck. During a clash with local police searching for them, Corporal Shimada was shot and killed. Onoda and Kazuka buried him in the jungle and held a small ceremony. Now only 2 soldiers remained. The isolation deepened. For nearly 20 more years, Onoda and Kazuka continued their mission. They raided farms for food. They set fire to crops they believed were supplying the enemy. They exchanged gunfire with search parties, convinced they were fighting infiltrators. To the local Filipinos, they were ghosts. To the Japanese government, they were a painful reminder of a war that refused to end. Then, in 1972, everything changed again. On October 19, 1972, Onoda and Kazuka were spotted by local police near a rice field. A firefight broke out. Kazuka was shot and killed instantly. Onoda escaped into the jungle, firing as he ran. For the first time in 28 years, Hiroo Onoda was completely alone. He had no one to talk to, no one to share the watch, no one to confirm that he wasn't losing his mind. The silence of the jungle became suffocating. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. He spoke to himself. He argued with ghosts. He replayed memories from 1944 over and over, trying to hold on to who he had been. But doubt began to creep in. What if the war really was over? What if everyone he knew was dead or old? What if he had wasted his entire life on a mission that no longer mattered? Still, he could not surrender, not without orders. In February 1974, a 24-year-old Japanese college dropout named Norio Suzuki decided to go on an adventure. His goal, he joked to friends, was to find Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman, in that order. Suzuki traveled to Lubang Island and began trekking through the jungle. He carried no weapons, just a camera and a sense of curiosity. After several days of searching, he did the unthinkable. He found Onoda. The 2 men stared at each other in disbelief. Suzuki, dressed in modern clothes, holding a camera, Onoda wearing a tattered 1940s uniform, rifle in hand, decades of isolation carved into his face. "Are you Lieutenant Onoda?" Suzuki asked in Japanese. Onoda didn't lower his rifle immediately, but something in Suzuki's tone, curiosity, not hostility, made him pause. "Yes," Onoda finally answered. Suzuki explained that the war had been over for 29 years. Japan had surrendered. The world had changed. Onoda listened, but he shook his head. "I cannot surrender," Onoda said, "unless I receive orders from my commanding officer." Suzuki understood. This wasn't about convincing Onoda the war was over. It was about military protocol. And so, Suzuki made a promise. He would return to Japan and find Onoda's commanding officer. What happened next would bring a 50-year-old man face to face with the 22-year-old boy he used to be. Suzuki kept his word. He returned to Japan and located Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, now 74 years old and living a quiet civilian life. When Suzuki explained the situation, Taniguchi was stunned. He had assumed Onoda was decades ago. On March 9, 1974, Taniguchi flew to the Philippines. The Japanese and Philippine governments arranged a meeting deep in the jungle. Onoda was told that a representative from the Japanese government wanted to speak with him. When Onoda saw Taniguchi, he froze. The man was old, frail, unrecognizable, but the voice was the same. Taniguchi stood as straight as his aged body would allow and gave a formal military salute. "Lieutenant Onoda," he said, "I hereby relieve you of your duties. The war is over. You are ordered to lay down your arms and return to Japan."
On March 10, 1974, Hiroo Onoda formally surrendered. He wore his uniform, though it was faded and torn. He handed over his sword, his rifle, still in working condition, and 500 rounds of ammunition. He also gave them his hand grenades, his dagger, and the military orders he had carried for 30 years. He stood at attention, tears streaming down his face, and saluted. For 29 years, he had been a soldier. Now, in an instant, he was just a man.
When Onoda returned to Japan, he was mobbed by thousands of people. He was a sensation. Some called him a hero. Others called him a relic. The media couldn't get enough of him. But Onoda struggled to adjust. The Japan he remembered, militaristic, disciplined, unified by war, no longer existed. The country had become wealthy, modern, and peaceful. He felt like a stranger in his own homeland. In interviews, Onoda said he didn't regret his actions. He had followed orders, he had done his duty. But when asked what he had lost, he grew quiet. 30 years, he said. I lost 30 years. Unable to find peace in Japan, Onoda moved to Brazil in 1975 and became a cattle rancher. In 1984, he returned to Lubang Island and donated $10,000 to a local school as an apology for the damage he and his men had caused over the years. He later founded a nature school in Japan, teaching children survival skills and discipline. He married, wrote a memoir, and spent his final years reflecting on the line between duty and obsession. Hiroo Onoda died on January 16, 2014, at the age of 91. He had lived two lives, one frozen in 1945 and one trying to catch up with a world that had moved on without him.
Hiroo Onoda's story is not just about survival. It's about loyalty taken to an extreme. It's about the cost of unwavering belief. And it's a reminder that sometimes the hardest part of war isn't the fighting. It's knowing when to stop. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe for more incredible true survival stories. What would you have done in Onoda's place? Let me know in the comments below.